Welcome back, everyone, to Confessions of a Loveaholic. I have an incredible guest with me today. Her name is Diana Parra, and she is a transformational coach, certified elite neuroencoding specialist. I can't wait to hear more about that because that's a new one for me. I love it. She is a licensed brain health trainer, certified behavior consultant, and certified grief educator. She is also a speaker and author of Leading with a Broken Heart, Finding Gold in Our Darkest Moments. Drawing on her personal experiences of loss and her training in psychology and neuroencoding, she works with women who are stuck and unable to move forward in life and are seeking clarity about who they are. She helps her clients release the past, regain their confidence, and redefine their identity so they can create a life they love. Diana, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Emmy, and I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited that you're here. I am so ready to dig deep into a lot of these topics. I know you are an expert in a lot of these areas, and I want to get started on the grief side. But before we go there, I want to make sure I let my audience know exactly why I brought you onto the show. As recovering loveaholics that my listeners are, one of the things that is so important for my clients to understand as they're going through the heartbreak process, whether it be a romantic heartbreak, whether it be a business heartbreak, whether it be a loss of a child, grief is a powerful, because it's much more than an emotion, right? I know you're going to go into this. And when we do not address, I'm not going to say deal with grief. When we do not address grief properly, it can do much damage to our physical body, to our soul, to our entire livelihood. And it can be devastating and absolutely destroy someone's life. And when it is addressed correctly, it is absolutely life transforming and life changing. So I'm so happy that you're here because this is an important, nay, critical part of being able to move forward in life and to bring in healthy love and having a healthy life. So Diana, how did you get started in this work in the first place?
Yeah. So actually, the my work around grief started pretty recently. It's probably about a year ago. I became certified as a grief educator, and how that came about is I myself have experienced a lot of excuse me, a lot of loss, a lot of grief. And I had 4 miscarriages years ago. And because, as you mentioned, I wasn't able at the time to process my grief. It really got me stuck. It did, affect my physical health, my emotional well-being. And so in doing the work and kind of understanding, what had happened, and through coaching and therapy and all sorts of things, I came to understand that a lot of what was causing all the challenges in my life was unprocessed grief around the loss of the miscarriages. And actually, at the time, I had, what they call, like, it was more than one loss because my dad passed away in the middle of all that. So it was kind of stacking. And so I got really curious about grief and understanding that for myself. And so, like I mentioned, I became certified and realized also that some of my clients, I work mostly with women, were also kind of in that stuck place due to unprocessed grief. So I did it for myself, but now I'm helping other people because I understand how it can really, that unprocessed grief can impact someone's life in a negative way, like you mentioned.
Well, I'm very happy that you're doing this because I think it's a small percentage of people who work directly with this, and it is so necessary. So thank you so much for sharing your background and for taking your pain and bringing it into this level of wisdom, because I know that that takes an added up level of support. So I'm glad that your spirit told you that it's time to now share your wisdom. So Diana, as we get started on this, I know there are some misconceptions around grief, and
Mhm.
what it is and what it isn't and how it's processed. Can you share about some of those misconceptions and how do you work to dispel them in your coaching?
Absolutely. So one of one of the most common ones, there's several, right? But one of the most common, the one that I find the most is people thinking, about the time frame. How long does it take for someone to process grief, right? You hear comments, you hear people say things like, let's say, someone got divorced. It's like, but it's been a year. You should, now be able to move on and find someone new and just move on with your life. Or someone lost their job and it's like, well, it's been 6 months. You should, go ahead and it's done. Like, go live your life or do something else. And really, grief, it's a very personal journey. We need to understand that. And there is no right or wrong time frame for grief. It depends on the loss, the circumstances, whether there was trauma related, with that loss or not. So, again, it depends. So one thing that I really ask people to do is just to let go of that misconception that it's supposed to take this amount of time, that it's taking too long or they didn't grieve long enough, right? Sometimes we hear that. It's a personal journey. It depends on the person. Some people move, more quickly, and for some people it takes a longer period of time, and that's okay. And that's the other thing that I teach my clients and tell my clients, it's okay. Wherever they are right now, that's okay. That's where they need to be.
And I think that's so important, Diana, around the timeline, right? We have, especially when it comes to grief, there is no such thing as the correct timeline, as you said. I can think back to the moment of my first real heartbreak from my boyfriend in college. We dated for almost 3 years. And I can tell you, after about a month or two, I was over. I'm not even really sure that I had the like full on grieving post breakup, because I grieved a lot of the relationship while we were together. I can think back now and be like, you know what? There was a lot of it where I grieved. I cried so much and I grieved so much of it. But by the time that I said bye to him, I was kind of already done. And it was a weird dynamic. But I can look back to that moment versus one where almost a decade later, one of my boyfriends that we dated for a year, and this relationship was more mature, more adult. I definitely had this inkling and feeling where I wanted us to get married. I thought we were getting close to that. And that when that fell apart or we were just not the right fit, it felt like I was having a heart attack every day for 6 months.
Mm.
Right. So for those 6 months after, and we were together for only a year, right? In quotation marks. So how was I still grieving this relationship in 6 months? And that was just the heart attack part, right? That felt like I was having that like true heartbreak. It took me much longer than that to truly grieve this. And it goes back to your point around, it was such a personal thing, the circumstances around it, the sort of the future me and the ideals that I had of what was going to happen in this relationship really like struck me to my core. And it was just a very different circumstance. So thank you so much for sharing that, because that's one of the things that I like to talk to with my clients around. Like, it's going to be a little bit different for every single person. So for someone listening, Diana, and especially if they're going through, let's say, a love heartbreak, and if someone is grieving this, do you recommend that they go out and start dating someone else as soon as possible and as fast as possible? I want to hear your insights on that.
Yeah, I would not recommend that. I think, and just to your point to what you mentioned before, I did want to say this about when you said that your first uh heartbreak and your, I think it was a boyfriend in college that um you kind of knew, that it was ending the relationship or that it would end. And you were grieving, during that time. You started grieving while you were still together before the relationship ended. And that's, something called anticipatory grief, right? And it's really, it happens also when we have a loved one that's, that's really sick, that's dying. We know it's coming. We don't know when necessarily. So we start the grieving process before the actual loss happens. And it can happen in a relationship, like you mentioned, things are not working out, and you kind of start grieving the loss before the relationship ends, right? And so back to your question about, what, my opinion is, I would say, because oftentimes we do things like that in order to not feel the pain of the loss, in order to distract ourselves or numb ourselves. So we jump into another relationship instead of really giving ourselves the permission and the time to grieve the loss of the first relationship. And what can happen, and I've seen this happen, and I'm not saying that happens every single time, but what can happen is you jump into that new relationship, and you just really, you're not ready, you're not emotionally ready, and things will come up eventually, and you will find yourself, not feeling, not being able to get like really close to that person, or you're just going to have a lot of issues come up because you're still trying to suppress the grief and the pain. And so when, grief needs to be witnessed in order to for that healing process to occur. So we need people around us when we experience a loss, no matter what type of loss it is. We need people to witness our grief, to let us know that it's okay. That, like I mentioned before, there is no right or wrong way to grieve or a timeline for grieving, and that they're there for us. So if we end a relationship and then jump right into another relationship, that's not really going to happen.
Wow, you brought up two very important things here that I want to make sure we cover, right? So the reason I gave you this setup, right, is I figured that would be Diana's answer, and because those of us who are in the healing work, we know that it's not healthy for someone to jump into a relationship right away, as we call a rebound, right?
Yeah.
And this is detrimental to everyone involved for multiple reasons, and we're not going to go into all of them. But to your point, Diana, it is a numbing mechanism. It is a distraction, right? It is someone who is trying to avoid the actual grieving process. And we get it. I get it. It hurts. I know, babes. I know. And here's what we can promise you is that if you go through it and you address it properly, it will start to hurt less and less and less and less every day. That we can promise you, and you will come out on the other side. But if you don't address it and you try to cover it up or suffocate it or try to numb yourself or distract yourself, especially with someone else, well, first, that's a very selfish move because you're hurting the other party and yourself. So selfish on both parts because you're not allowing yourself to be and breathe. And it's just the foundation can't be healthy. You won't be in a healthy relationship. But I really want to go into this next element that you discussed around the witnessing. Can you go deeper into that? Because I think that is, especially for my executive clients who think they have to do everything on their own, and especially if they feel like crying, they have to hide. So you saying that grief needs to be witnessed, that is so powerful. I can remember the moment where I had my best friend come over to my house with a box of Kleenex and I think some chicken soup or something. And she sat with me for 4 or 5 hours while I just like ugly cried, ugly sobbed. I mean, I'm talking about boogers everywhere, like mascara. I don't even think I was wearing makeup, thankfully, but like that kind of ugly cry where like my heart would just, it felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. That was so healing for her to just sit and be with me. So I didn't know this concept about like grief needed to be witnessed. Can you tell us more about that? Because as I'm reliving this, I'm thinking, oh my God, yeah, that was just such an important and beautiful part of the journey.
Yeah. And, I mean, what a beautiful gift she gave you. What a beautiful gift. And that's exactly what you know what I mean when I say grief needs to be witnessed, right? We need to be able to go through that process and not feel like we have to take care of somebody else, right? And so what your friend did for you was exactly that. And you know, people sometimes will say to me, will ask me, well, I don't know what to say, you know, and this is very common. I remember, you know, it would happen to me, like, what do you say, you know, when, you know, do you say I'm sorry? Do you say, you know, what do you say? What don't you say? Right? Because we don't want to say the wrong thing. And so what I tell people is like, you know, you really don't need to say anything. You can just tell them that you're there for them. You can just say, you know, excuse me, like your friend did, I'm going to sit here with you and I'm just going to be with you. And if you need anything, if you want to talk, I will listen to you. You know, so if the person needs to talk about the loved one that they, you know, whatever the loss is, if they need to talk about it, if they need to share memories, if they need to, then we just listen and we let them go, because that's part of the process, right? Processing the grief and the memories and the pain. And yes, it's going to be painful and they're going to cry and they're going to have ugly, you know, cry like you did. And that's okay. Just be there for them and witness their pain, basically, right? Witness their pain without trying to change it, without trying to fix it. Just be there and hold space for them. And that is really like the best thing you can do, and it's the most beautiful gift because, as you said, you know, you experienced that as very healing.
Absolutely. I can look back now to that moment and be like, wow, that was a pivotal. It was so magical to be able, and you're right, it was a gift and it was an absolute gift. And she and I have been through multiple rounds and iterations of that, and we've been able to do that for each other. So the power of having sacred sisterhood, right? And being
Yeah.
able to do and share this with someone. So, Diana, as we're going through some of the concepts and some of the elements of grief, if someone's listening to this and maybe wondering, like, maybe do I have grief that's unresolved? Is it stuck somewhere in my body? How do you personally guide them towards the path of healing and acceptance? And would you like to share a little bit about neuroencoding here, or in a different way? You tell me, because I also want to know about neuroencoding. So like if that's a separate topic, we can address that separately. But if you want to bring it in here, I'd love to know more about neuroencoding and how you personally walk your clients towards that path of healing and acceptance, because I think acceptance is a really difficult thing to get to when you're in the middle of grief and you think you're never going to get there.
Yeah, yeah. And absolutely, I can talk about both because I do use neuroencoding in working with clients that are going through grief. And so let me just quickly tell you what, you know, tell your audience what neuroencoding is so they understand. So really the process of neuroencoding is really involves coding, like reprogramming our brains to automatically default to like our best thinking, our best, you know, actions, and, you know, our best emotions. And that way we can have, you know, the results that we want, whatever the goal is, you know, that we're seeking in life. And it's being able to do that like much faster, right? So sometimes we can do that, but it takes us a long time to move through that process, right? And so with neuroencoding, I teach my clients tools and techniques that help them really go through that much quicker, so they don't get stuck, right? And so without, you know, and let me just say this, with also allowing them to feel their feelings. But a lot of that, and this is, you know, when I'm working with clients with grief, a lot of what I do with them is kind of what I'm doing here today is education, right? Because I mean, think about it. Nobody tells us about grief. Nobody wants to talk about grief or death or dying, right? Those are things that most of us avoid. And so because we're not educated around grief, and we're really, as my mentor says, you know, we live in a grief illiterate, you know, culture world, we don't know what to do. And you know, when we are ourselves experiencing grief, we don't understand what's happening. We don't understand a lot of what we're feeling. We don't really understand like how this is going to go. And so what happens for some people is, and I think a lot of people, they avoid the feelings, the grief, the pain, because it feels overwhelming. It feels like, where is this going to take me? How long am I going to be feeling, this way? And so it can be a little scary. And the education piece can really help with that, because understanding, okay, this is normal, feeling sad, crying, feeling sometimes anxious, not being able to sleep, not wanting to eat, not wanting to do anything. This is all normal. And it's going to take time. And okay, it is also okay for me not to know right now how long this, period of time is going to be, and then understanding what I need is support. So, like kind of like what you did, let me find like a close friend or a close family member, or a professional, a coach, a therapist, whatever, whomever you need to help me and guide me through this. So with the neuroencoding piece is, again, and it depends on how long the person has been grieving. I would not really do any of that work, the neuroencoding piece specifically, if someone is just experienced the loss of a loved one 2 months ago or a month ago, or maybe not even a year ago. They really need that time to process. I would give them support and help them with the grief piece, but once they're ready, to to kind of move forward, and maybe they realize that, hey, like I have, I feel kind of like I'm stuck, like I can't let go of the past, of the pain, but I really want to. That's when I would, really help them with that, so that they can move forward, right? Because that tells me they're ready. And so a lot of that is just helping them to understand, that our thoughts lead to our emotions, and our emotions lead to our actions, and our actions lead to our, results. And so giving them, tools and techniques to do that. I can share one quickly, specifically that's neuroencoding. It's called polishing up your memories. And what I ask my clients to do is to, about 3 times a day, for 10 minutes each time, sit down and just write all the memories, make a list of all the memories that you have with that person, with that loved one, or that situation. And so what starts to happen is we're reprogramming our brain to then, when we think about the person, to think about all the beautiful memories, all the good things. So instead of, when we think about them, instead of feeling sad, we're going to really, what's going to come up for us is a lot of love, remembering them with that love. And sometimes, it's happened to me when I think about my dad, and I just find myself like smiling, right? Because I'm thinking about all the beautiful memories, instead of thinking about them and immediately feeling bad and sad because they're no longer with us.
I love that technique, Diana. You said that that's called polishing up your memories.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. And what you're describing with neuroencoding sounds very similar to what I do with my clients with superconscious recodes. So I absolutely love anything to do with the neurological side, because it is, that needs to be done in order for the rewiring to happen, and then the body to experience that what you just described, right? To go from sadness to that smile. It could be the same memory, but it's a reframe in the body and how it experiences it. And it's just so much more relieving. And it's a much more beautiful way to live, right? Because you can be in the sense of gratitude instead of that sense of despair. And to your point, it is not, for those of you listening, this is not something that we try to push. No practitioner should try to push you into, quote unquote, getting over something
Right.
that has been traumatic,
Right.
whether it's a loss or whatever is traumatic to you. Like a week or two or a month or two, and like you said, even a loss of a family member, even a year we're not going to call it normal, because we don't talk about normal here, but it's a healthy processing time. So this is not about, quote unquote, fast tracking, but it is about, if someone feels like if their life is put on hold for too long and other areas of their life are now suffering, then that's when we step in and be like, okay, now let's help remove some of those blockages, right? Any comment on that, Diana?
Yeah, exactly. That's a, beautifully said, and I completely agree. And just if I can give you a quick, personal example, that's what happened to me. And this is why I'm so passionate about, educating people about grief and helping my clients through grief. It's because, when I had the 4 miscarriages, I did exactly that. I distracted myself. I avoided the pain. It was overwhelming to me. And so I jumped like right back into life, right back into work, right back as if nothing. And to top it off, because, in our culture, we're told, don't tell people you're pregnant until after X amount of time, because things can happen. So my miscarriages were early on. So I had not really told anyone other than obviously my husband and like my immediate family and my one, one of my closest friends. So no one knew. So again, when I experienced those losses, I didn't talk about it, and therefore it wasn't witnessed, you know. And so that really, because I suppressed all of that, because I avoided feeling all of those feelings and didn't go through them, it really had a negative impact. I became very eventually depressed, anxious, and got to the point where I no longer wanted to be here. And anyway, so you're completely, right in saying that it's not about, making someone go through the process faster. It's really, and usually the person will know. Like I knew at one point, eventually I was like, okay, something has to change here. Like, like what's going on? So, and that's when I sought help, but yes.
Thank you, Diana. I think this is the perfect segue into my next question for you. In your opinion, how does the process of grieving, particularly after a significant loss, impact a person's sense of identity and self-esteem? We were just going into like how it can create this like deep depression and sense of the anxiousness, and to the point where we sometimes are going into the space of like, maybe I don't want to be here anymore, because maybe that way we can get rid of the pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is definitely, our identity is tied to so many things, right? And so when we experience the loss, right? So going back to my example, when I had the miscarriages, my identity as a mother, a future mother, was completely gone, right? And I no longer knew what, not being able to have children, like what did that mean? What did it mean for me as a woman, as a mother, that I wanted to be a mom, as a wife? What is my husband? How does he see me now? And so there was a lot of, shame and guilt tied to that, which is, very common with miscarriage. And, it can happen to someone, that let's say they lost their job, right? So if their identity, or they see themselves identify as like the sole provider, what does that make me now? Like what does that mean? Or, again, in a relationship, maybe there's a divorce, like, you lose the identity of, wife, or, or in a relationship, girlfriend, all of those things. And so it kind of, when we lose that, we feel there's a sense of like, I don't know who I am anymore. And then there has to be a process of kind of, redefining who we are or who we want to be, moving forward, so that you can then create that life that you desire.
That is so true, Diana. Wow. I think this is not talked about enough in our culture, around the sense of the loss of identity, right? And just how detrimental that can be to someone. Like your entire world can be flipped upside down in a nanosecond, in an instant. And here's what's sad, especially when it comes to the loss of potentially being a mom, right? Sometimes people are wanting to be helpful and they're just saying, oh, that's okay, just keep trying. Like it's easy, like just do it again, right? So it's like, there's so much more to that. Even a sense of losing a job, to your point, around someone who is the sole provider. And this particularly for men, I work with a lot of my male clients around this, where like they don't know how to be or how to interact. And in fact, sometimes their testosterone levels drop. like significantly to the point where they don't know how to operate on a daily basis. So that our sense of identity is what drives everything we do on a daily basis. It's what runs our autopilot. And when that identity has shifted, we lose all sense of self. We lose sense of who we are and what we do and how we operate in the world and how we interact with others in the world. And this is why it's so important to work with experts like Diana, like myself, because when you have a coach who knows what they're talking about, we can help you reframe and create that new sense of identity, because your identity is not gone. You are not your job. You are not your title. You are not anything. You're not even a mom, right? Or a dad or a whatever. Like, we are our own selves and our own entity. We can add on bonus titles, right? But when we have for so long yearned for something, for the title of wife or fiance or whatever, and when that is lost, it is a loss. And our culture doesn't really appreciate that. We don't have, heartbreak days at work. We can't take PTO for being sad. Or for you, like, how scary is that, or how like traumatizing it can be, where you had to keep all these secrets. Now no one knows, they can't sit and they can't witness. And you also don't want people to know at work because this is a private matter. So, oh my goodness, that gets so clunky so quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it creates, it creates more shame, because we start feeling like, almost like, in my experience anyway, with the miscarriages, almost like I did something wrong, and it's really, I mean, think about it. It's really more like I'm taking care of the people rather than others taking care of me. I'm making sure they're okay and they're not, they don't have to feel uncomfortable because of, what happened to me because of my experience. And so that doesn't allow the space for, for the person to get the support that they need. Because it's not about the other people, right? It's about the person who's in grief. They're the ones that need the support.
Wow, you're so right. So on top of that, when someone is grieving and now they have to protect everyone else's feelings because so that they don't have to go through the discomfort, right?
Right.
Oh man, that gets wonky. I
Yeah.
love that you shared around how to be with someone this, and sometimes it is tricky to know what do you say, how do you go about this. And I think this is actually the perfect way to sort of start wrapping us up here, Diana. What would be some of your final words for our listeners around how can they share and witness with a loved one or a friend without, quote unquote, putting in air quotes here, making it worse, without making this person go through more pain?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, to focus on them and what they need. So sometimes, like I mentioned, just sitting with them, cooking them, preparing them a meal, just kind of, even sometimes I've done this. I'll say, I'm here for you, and whatever you need, just please let me know. So let them tell you what they need, right? Definitely avoid platitudes, things like, so this happened to me with the miscarriages. I heard, well, at least, you can get pregnant. It was not, it was with good intention, right? It was, I understand they were trying to make me feel good, but that's, what I mean? Like, that's not, it didn't make me feel good at the time, because I'm I'm experiencing the loss of, my babies. So avoid things like that. Avoid things like, it happened for a reason is another, common one. It's like, that's not what we want to hear. So avoid things like that, and instead just focus on, the person, the individual, and how they're feeling. Just understand that, when we are in grief, we're just in pain. We're just in pain, and sometimes the pain feels so big, that we barely have the energy, and sometimes we don't, to like get out of bed and shower and eat, prepare a meal. So, so think about those things. It's like, okay, again, you can prepare them a meal, bring them by, and if they want you to stay for a little bit, fine. If they say, I really don't want, any company right now, just respect that. That's okay too. It's not a personal thing that, it's not against you. It's just they want to be alone. And just check in with them, every so often. Send them, making a phone call or stop by, or, it's just the main thing. Again, it's to witness, to allow them basically to go through that experience, to go through that process, and to go through their grief, and not try, without trying to fix it, or, or do something about it. There's no need for that. This is death is part of life. Grief is part of life. It's a process. And what people need is just really, support, just knowing that it's okay for them to be and feel, the way they feel in that moment.
Thank you so much, Diana. Diana, if someone is experiencing any level of loss and they need to figure out how to get a hold of you, what is the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Sure. They can visit my website, dianaparrainternational.com. You can find me on social media. My Instagram handle is at Diana Parra 888. And you can find me on Facebook, Diana Parra.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Diana, for being on our show today. You are an absolute blessing, and I'm so happy that we got to talk about this very, very important topic that is difficult to talk about. So, but we must. So doing it with experts like yourself, I really appreciate you.
No, thank you so much for having me.